The courtroom was too cold for June. Callie's thin sweater did little against the air conditioning that seemed set to freeze out her nerves. She sat motionless in the oversized leather chair beside her foster father, legs swinging, barely brushing the polished floor. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, but one thumb tapped lightly against the other, a rhythm only one creature in the room knew how to read. Jasper lay at her feet, his black and white fur unmoving except for the flick of a single ear. To the rest of the court, he looked like any well-trained service dog, calm, obedient, docile. But his eyes never left Callie's fingers. Across the room, Callie's mother shifted in her chair, arms folded tightly, lips pressed into a line, as if she were tasting something bitter. Her lawyer whispered something into her ear. She didn't blink. Callie didn't look at her. The judge, an older man with silver eyebrows and a tired expression, skimmed the custody report in front of him, flipping through pages with the dull resignation of someone who'd seen too many children caught between adults who cared more about winning than about the child herself. "Miss Callie Morgan," he said, lifting his eyes to her. "Would you like to speak today?" Callie's eyes flicked to him, then dropped. Jasper stirred, rising slightly to rest his head on her ankle. Her mouth opened, then closed again. The judge sighed, not impatiently, but with the kind of sorrow that had settled deep into his bones. "I understand," he said. "You don't have to speak, but if you do, now is the time." Callie remained silent. Mark, her foster father, reached a hand toward her, but didn't touch her. His voice, when it came, was gentle. "She hasn't spoken in front of strangers in over a year, Your Honor, only to Jasper, and sometimes to Willow." "Willow?" the judge asked, glancing down the page. "Her therapy horse. She rides on weekends at the Meadowbrook Rescue," Mark explained. "We've been going since she came to live with us. It's the only place where she seems to breathe easier." Callie didn't move, but her thumbs stopped tapping. The courtroom murmured faintly behind them. Law clerks, reporters, other waiting cases, all strangers, all watching. "She's not ready," said the mother's lawyer, a tall woman with sharp cheekbones and a voice that cut through the hush like scissors. "And if she can't testify, Your Honor, we move to conclude the hearing and return her to her biological parent." Mark's jaw tightened. "She's not ready because she's terrified. That doesn't mean she should go back into a house where she never felt safe." "You have no proof of abuse," the attorney replied coolly. "No physical injuries, no medical records. Just a scared little girl who refuses to speak. That doesn't justify terminating parental rights." Callie flinched, almost imperceptibly. But Jasper noticed. His nose nudged her knee, quiet and steady. The judge raised a hand. "Enough. This isn't about winning a debate. It's about what's best for the child." Silence again. Callie stared down at the grain in the wooden floor. A line there looked like a river. She imagined Willow's hooves clicking against the trail at Meadowbrook, Jasper running beside her, sun warming her back. Not like this courtroom, full of cold voices and shadows. She remembered the last time she'd seen her mother. Not in this neat blue dress and polished shoes, but slouched on the couch, beer in hand, boyfriend shouting from the kitchen. The bruises hadn't been visible then either. She remembered hiding in the hallway closet. Jasper had found her there, weeks later, after Mark brought him home. He had sniffed until he pawed at the door, then lay beside it for hours until she cracked it open. He didn't bark, didn't force his way in. He just waited. She loved him for that. Now, his head pressed harder against her leg. The courtroom was watching again. Her thumb began to move, not tapping now, but tracing. 3 quick flicks, 1 pause, then a short stroke downward, invisible to anyone who didn't know the code. Jasper stood. Gasps rippled through the court as the dog moved. He didn't bark, didn't growl. But he crossed the space between Callie and the judge with purpose, stopped right in front of the bench, and sat. straight-backed and unflinching, eyes trained on the man in the robe. The judge blinked. Is he trained to do that? Mark stood slowly. Your Honor, Jasper is a trauma response dog. He's trained to respond to signals when Callie's experiencing a high-stress trigger. What kind of signal? She created her own. He knows it. We didn't teach it. Callie's mother leaned forward. This is absurd. She's manipulating the court with a dog. She hasn't spoken in over a year, Mark said quietly. This is the only way she can tell us something's wrong. The judge studied Jasper. The dog didn't move. Callie watched, breath tight, waiting, not for them to believe her, but for them to believe him. The bailiff stepped forward, unsure. Should I? The judge shook his head. No, let the dog stay. Jasper blinked once, then looked over his shoulder, back at Callie. She stood slowly, her knees trembling, eyes fixed on him. Then she walked forward. Not toward her mother. Not toward Mark. Toward Jasper. She knelt beside him, placed a small hand on his back, and raised her other hand to the judge. One finger up, pause. Then she drew a line across her chest. Jasper lay down flat, tail curled tightly to his side. Silent. The judge looked to Mark. What does that mean? Mark swallowed. She used it once before, during therapy, with Willow. It means, I remember. Remember what? She can't say it, Judge. But it was the same signal she used when she first touched Willow's scars. That horse had been beaten. Callie recognized the pain. Are you telling me this girl is identifying trauma through a dog and a horse? Mark looked down at Callie. Her hand was shaking. I'm telling you, sir. She's trying to tell you what happened. You just have to be willing to listen in the way she can speak. The judge sat back in his chair, gaze moving slowly between the girl and the dog. Then maybe it's time we listen differently. He banged his gavel once. Court is in recess. Bring in the child psychologist who's worked with her. We reconvene in 1 hour. Callie didn't move. But Jasper's tail flicked once, a small, hopeful wag. The psychologist's office smelled like lavender and dust, and the light coming through the curtains was too soft to feel real. Callie sat in the corner on a poof, shaped like a cloud, legs tucked underneath her. Jasper curled beside her with his, head resting gently on her foot, like a quiet promise. Across the room, Dr. Lena Monroe flipped through a small folder, her glasses sliding to the tip of her nose. She glanced up only once, noting the way Callie's eyes avoided everything except the dog. She didn't push. She never did. Mark stood by the doorway, shoulders stiff from restraint. He wasn't allowed to sit in this time. This moment had to be hers. Hey there, sweetheart, Dr. Monroe said, her voice as gentle as the room. You want to draw again today? Callie didn't move. Jasper exhaled. I have those new pastel pencils you liked, the doctor added. The ones that blend like watercolor. Callie glanced sideways, only for a moment, then turned back to the floor. The silence wasn't heavy. It was patient. Dr. Monroe walked to the art shelf, placed a sketch pad and a tin of colored pencils on the table by the window and stepped back. Whenever you're ready. Then she walked out the door, pausing only to pat Mark on the shoulder. Give her time. She doesn't speak with words, but she's not quiet. You just have to read her differently. Minutes passed. Callie didn't move. Jasper did. He stood, up, stretched his long legs with a slow shake of his fur, and walked to the table. He sat beside the chair and looked back. Callie blinked. Then slowly, deliberately, she stood, patted over, and sat down. The pencils felt warm in her hand. She didn't draw right away. She stared out the window, down into the garden where wind moved through the lavender bushes like water. Then, she picked up a soft blue pencil and began to sketch. Not a horse. Not today. A house. Tilted slightly, like it might fall over. Windows boarded. A single light in the attic, flickering. She drew a child in the yard. A child with no mouth. And, beside her, a dog with large, kind eyes. She added shadows last, tall ones leaning from the house like reaching arms. She pressed hard, grinding the pastel pencil to a soft nub, then smeared the edges with the side of her palm until the whole lower half of the page looked like smoke. When she was done, she turned it around and left it on the table. Jasper nudged it once with his nose. Outside the window, Mark watched the doctor come back in. Her eyes fell on the drawing. Her face changed, not in shock, but in a quiet way, like someone recognizing a pain they've seen before. "She's telling us," she whispered, "just not in the way we're used to." The courtroom was warmer when they returned. Afternoon light pooled on the wood floor, catching flecks of dust in the stillness. The judge sat straighter now, alert. He gestured for the psychologist to take the stand. Callie sat beside Mark again. Jasper at her feet. She held a folded piece of paper in her lap. The drawing. The judge leaned forward. "Dr. Monroe, we understand you've been working with Miss Morgan for 3 months." "Yes, Your Honor. She's nonverbal due to trauma-based selective mutism, but she's communicative through symbols, animals, gestures, and most recently, through art." "Has she ever disclosed any direct accusations?" Dr. Monroe paused, not with traditional language, but today she left this. She held up the drawing. "There's a clear representation of fear, isolation, and observation, particularly the shadows and the boarded windows. It's a depiction of being trapped, watched, and silenced. The child in the picture has no mouth." She could be imagining. Possible. But she placed herself outside the house. The dog beside her is her current service animal. The house is specific, familiar. The shadows reach toward her. Callie sat still, head slightly bowed, but one finger brushed Jasper's fur slowly, repeating. "She." "Use the same gesture in my office she did in this courtroom earlier," Dr. Monroe added. "It's a signal she's created, her way of saying, 'I remember.' She only uses it when referencing experiences that frightened her." The judge was quiet a moment. "And the mother?" "Callie has never drawn her, but she's drawn this house before. Every time, the door is locked from the inside." The mother's lawyer stood abruptly. "We object to speculation. This is an interpretation, not evidence." Dr. Monroe met her eyes. "With children, especially those who've been silenced, the absence of direct speech doesn't mean the absence of truth. Her trauma is real. You just don't want to look at it." The mother stood. "She's manipulating all of you. She never spoke to me either. She's always been quiet, always strange. I tried to help her, but she's broken." The courtroom chilled again. Mark stood slowly. "She's not broken. She's protecting herself. And she has the right to keep doing that in a home where she's not afraid." Callie lifted her head then. She looked at her mother, not with anger, not with fear, but with something harder. A quiet resolve. She reached down and tugged a small blue ribbon from Jasper's collar, one she'd braided herself months ago after their first long walk through Meadowbrook's pasture. She held it in her fingers, twisted it once. Then she placed it on the table in front of her like a signature. The judge watched all of it. "Court will adjourn until tomorrow morning," he said at last. "I need time to review this properly. But rest assured, Miss Morgan, this court sees you, whether you speak or not." He stood. "You are not invisible here." Callie didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply leaned down and wrapped her arms around Jasper's neck. And for the first time in months, she let herself exhale. Not everything was safe yet, but something had shifted. And for the first time, she believed someone was listening. The morning of the final hearing arrived shrouded in a hush, as though the town itself were holding its breath. The courthouse sat solemn beneath the rising sun, light spilling over its stone steps like judgment had already begun to unfold. Callie wore a pale blue dress, the one Mark had picked out from the thrift shop downtown. It hung loose on her shoulders but matched the ribbon she'd tied around Jasper's neck. He padded beside her, ears alert, tail low but steady. Mark's hand rested gently at the small of her back as they climbed the steps together, each footfall echoing the weight of all the days before this one. Inside, the courtroom was colder than usual, though not in temperature. The air felt brittle, like the fragile moment before glass breaks. The mother sat rigid behind her lawyer, arms folded tightly, her jaw clenched with unspoken fury. She wore all black this time, as if mourning something not yet gone, but already slipping from her grasp. Dr. Monroe nodded a small greeting as Callie entered, then resumed her seat near the front. Today, there would be no testimony, just final statements and the judge's ruling. Mark leaned down beside Callie. "You ready, kiddo?" She nodded once. Her fingers brushed the drawing folded in her pocket, the one she hadn't shown anyone. Else, not yet, not even Mark. The judge entered, and the room stood. His expression was unreadable, stern, but not unkind. He adjusted his glasses and scanned the courtroom like a man weighing two versions of the same truth. "You may be seated." He began slowly, recounting the timeline. The initial custody dispute, the evaluations, the temporary foster placement. He noted the psychological findings, the lack of direct evidence from Callie, but also the consistency of her communication, through other means, gestures, artwork, animal interaction. Then he paused. "Before I render a final decision, I want to make something very clear," he said, his gaze sweeping both parties. "The role of this court is not to assign blame, but to ensure safety, stability, and emotional well-being, especially for children unable to advocate for themselves in conventional ways." Callie's hand tightened around Jasper's collar. "Miss Morgan," the judge said, "we recognize that your silence is not a void. It is a choice, a language all its own. You've spoken through your art, your bond with Jasper, and your ability to trust again in a world that once betrayed you." He turned to Mark. "And Mr. Callahan, while you are not related to this child by blood, your actions demonstrate something far more binding: protection, consistency, and unconditional care." The mother's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, the biological connection has been noted," the judge interrupted, his voice firm. "But it is not the only factor that constitutes parenthood." A silence settled. Then the judge addressed Callie directly. "You have a choice, young lady. If you wish, you may remain seated. But if there is anything you wish to share, any way you wish to express yourself, this court will make space for it now." All eyes turned to her. She didn't stand. She reached into her pocket, unfolded the paper slowly, and held it up. It was a new drawing, different from the others. Small girl, herself, standing in a field. Beside her, Jasper, tail high, ears perked toward the wind. Behind them, the house again. But now the windows were open, the shadows gone. In their place, light spilled from every pane. In the sky above, 3 birds flew, soaring, free. But the detail that made the room hold still, a ribbon, tied between the girl's wrist and the dog's collar. A silent tether of trust. The judge leaned forward to see it more clearly. Callie didn't speak. She just nodded once. It was enough. "Thank you," he said quietly. "The court will recess for 1 hour. Final ruling to follow." Mark and Callie waited outside on the courthouse steps, Jasper curled at their feet. Cars passed by slowly on Main Street, the rhythm of life continuing around them, as if unaware that everything in their world was about to change. He didn't speak, didn't push. But Callie, after a few long moments, tugged gently at his sleeve. She reached into her coat again and pulled out something else, a photo this time. Crumpled edges, black and white. A man, holding a baby, her. On the back, in neat block letters, "To my daughter, the best of me lives in you." She handed it to Mark and looked up at him. Then she pointed to herself and to him. He swallowed hard. "You sure?" She nodded, then leaned her head against his arm. It wasn't language, but it was loud. The hour passed slow and heavy, and when they were called back in, the courtroom felt different, expectant, like it had learned something in their absence. The judge stood as they entered. "This court rules in favor of permanent guardianship awarded to Mr. Mark Callahan." A stunned silence followed. The mother rose, trembling, her voice sharp. "You're giving her to him over me?" "She's not an object to be given," the judge replied calmly. "She's a child seeking safety, and this court is providing it." Callie didn't look at her mother, not out of hate, but because she no longer needed to. Mark crouched to her level. "We're going home, kiddo." And for the first time in forever, Callie smiled, just a little. But enough. That evening, they returned to Meadowbrook Ranch under a golden sky. The horses called to them from the field, Jasper bounding ahead to greet them like he already knew the world had shifted. Callie walked slowly through the pasture, stopping at the fence where the old mare stood. Luna, white as moonlight, and nearly blind but gentle. The mare lowered her head and Callie placed a hand on her forehead, their breaths sinking in silence. Mark stood a few feet behind, watching. And then, quietly, as if unsure of her own voice, Callie turned. "Dad," she whispered. One word. Fragile. Whole. Mark's eyes burned. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because in that single word, the past broke open, and something new began. Not all wounds had healed. Not yet. But with Jasper at her side and Mark's hand resting lightly on her shoulder, Callie had found something more lasting than safety. She'd found home.